December 14th, 1942. 3:47 a.m. Chrysler Tank Arsenal, Warren, Michigan. The temperature inside Bay 7 read 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Rose Will Monroe, 28 years old, 5'4", former waitress from Pulaski County, Kentucky, positioned a pneumatic rivet gun against the hull of Sherman tank M4A3 serial number 5847. Her hands, which 2 years earlier had carried coffee pots and pie plates, now held a tool weighing 32 pounds. Around her, 847 women worked the graveyard shift. The noise was so loud that supervisors communicated through hand signals. Rose pressed the trigger. The rivet gun hammered at 500 impacts per minute. Sparks sprayed across her leather apron. She had 300 rivets to set before 6 a.m. Behind her, 16 incomplete tank hulls waited on the assembly line. Somewhere in North Africa, American boys were dying because they didn't have enough armor. Rose knew this. Every woman on that floor knew this. Before we continue with Rose's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Warren, Michigan, December 1942, where Rose Will Monroe was about to help change the course of history. 9 months earlier, everything had been different. Rose Will Monroe grew up in a 4-room house outside Pulaski County, Kentucky. Her father drove a coal truck. Her mother took in laundry. Rose graduated 8th grade, which was further than most girls in Pulaski County went, in 1932. At 19, she married a mechanic named John Monroe. They had 2 daughters. John fixed cars at Patterson's garage for $18 a week. Rose waitressed at the Greyhound bus station, $0, 35 an hour plus tips. December 7th, 1941 changed everything. John enlisted in the Navy 3 days after Pearl Harbor. He shipped out to San Diego in January 1942. Rose received his letters every 2 weeks. He wrote about the heat, the drilling, the awful food. He never wrote about what came next, but Rose knew. Everyone knew. The Pacific Theater was consuming men at a rate no one had anticipated. By March 1942, Rose faced an impossible situation. 2 daughters to feed. Rent due. John's Navy pay was $50 a month, but it took 6 weeks to arrive. The bus station cut her hours because gas rationing meant fewer travelers. She earned $11 one week, $8 the next week. Her savings account held $47. Then she saw the poster at the post office. Women needed for war work, 40 week. Chrysler Tank Arsenal, housing assistance available, $40 per week. Rose read it 3 times. That was more than John made as a mechanic, more than her father made driving coal. The poster showed a woman in coveralls holding a wrench, strong jaw, determined eyes. The slogan read, "We can do it." Rose took the poster information to her mother's house that night. Her mother, 52 years old, lifelong resident of Pulaski County, looked at her daughter like she'd proposed flying to the moon. "Factory work?" her mother said. "Rose, you don't know nothing about factories." "I can learn," Rose said. "Detroit is 400 miles away. You don't know nobody there." "They got housing assistance." Her mother shook her head. "What about the girls?" "You and Daddy could watch them. I'd send money every week. More money than we ever had." Her mother looked at the poster again, at the woman in the coveralls. "Your daddy won't like it." "Daddy don't have to like it," Rose said. "We need the money, and those boys overseas need tanks." Rose Will Monroe arrived at Michigan Central Station in Detroit on April 3, 1942. She carried 1 suitcase. She wore her only good dress. She had never been more than 50 miles from Pulaski County in her entire life. Detroit looked like a different planet. Buildings 12 stories tall, streetcars, more cars than she'd seen in her entire life. The noise overwhelmed her. The smell of industrial smoke mixed with river water and hot asphalt. She took a bus to the Chrysler Employment Office on Lynch Road. The waiting room held 67 women. Rose counted them. Ages ranged from 18 to 54. Farm girls from Iowa, secretaries from Ohio, a former schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, a bookkeeper from West Virginia. 3 women spoke with accents Rose couldn't place. Later she learned they were Polish immigrants from Hamtramck. Every single one of them looked as terrified as Rose felt. A man in a brown suit called names from a clipboard. Monroe's Rose W. Rose stood. The man led her to a smaller room. Another man sat behind a desk. He wore thick glasses and had oil stains on his shirt cuffs. His nameplate read, Frank Gardner, Production Supervisor. Mrs. Monroe, Gardner said, looking at her application, says here you worked as a waitress. Yes, sir. 4 years at the Greyhound station. Ever work with tools? No, sir. Ever work in manufacturing? No, sir. Gardner looked up at her. Can you follow instructions exactly? Yes, sir. Can you work 12-hour shifts? Yes, sir. Can you lift 50 pounds? Rose hesitated. I carried my daughter when she was sick with pneumonia for 3 hours straight to get to the doctor. She weighed 42 pounds. So yes, sir, I expect I can. Gardner almost smiled. Almost. Training starts Monday, 6 a.m. Don't be late. Late workers don't get hired. Housing is at Willow Run Dormitory. $7 a week deducted from pay. Any questions? What will I be doing, sir? Building tanks, Mrs. Monroe. We're going to teach you to build tanks. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal occupied 113 acres in Warren, Michigan. The main building stretched 100 feet long and 600 feet wide. Inside, the noise hit like a physical force, hammering, grinding, the screech of metal on metal, the hiss of welding torches, the thunder of stamping presses. Rose's ears rang for 3 days straight before she adjusted. Training lasted 1 week. 1 week to learn what would have taken 18 months in peacetime. Rose's instructor was a man named Carl Bittner, 54 years old, former Ford assembly supervisor, recalled from retirement. Bittner had worked automobile assembly for 32 years. He knew the difference between training men and training women, and he approached it with zero sentimentality. Listen up, Bittner told Rose's training group of 14 women on that first Monday. I don't care if you're a woman. I don't care if you never held a wrench before. I care if you can do the job. The boys in North Africa are getting killed because they don't have enough armor. You want to help them? Learn fast, learn right. Questions are good, mistakes are bad. Repeated mistakes get you fired. Understood? 14 women nodded. Good, Bittner said. Let's start with how not to kill yourself with a rivet gun. The rivet gun weighed 32 pounds. Rose's arms shook the first time she lifted it. Bittner showed her how to brace it against her hip, how to position her feet for leverage, how to squeeze the trigger in controlled bursts. The gun hammered so hard it bruised her shoulder through the leather pad. Her hands went numb after 15 minutes. Bittner made her practice for 4 hours straight. Again, Bittner said. Rose positioned the gun, squeezed. The rivet set perfectly. Again. Another perfect rivet. Again. Rose's arms felt like rubber. Sweat soaked through her coveralls despite the April cold. Her shoulder throbbed. She squeezed the trigger. Perfect rivet. Good, Bittner said. Now do that 200-300 times a day for the next 3 years. By the end of week 1, Rose could set 180 rivets per hour. By week 2, 240 rivets per hour. By week 3, she matched the pace of men who'd been doing it for 6 months. She wasn't unique. Across the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, the same pattern repeated. Women who'd never touched industrial equipment became welders, press operators, lathe operators, inspectors, crane operators. Mary Doyle, former telephone operator from Pittsburgh, learned to weld armor plate. Her first attempts looked like molten chaos. 3 weeks later, her welds passed X-ray inspection. Catherine Stump, former sales clerk from Akron, operated a 400-ton stamping press that shaped turret rings. Helen Studer, former librarian from Columbus, inspected gun barrel rifling using precision micrometers. The skeptics had been loud and numerous. In January 1942, when the War Department first proposed recruiting women for heavy manufacturing, Military traditionalists resisted furiously. General Leslie McNair testified before Congress that women lack the physical strength and mechanical aptitude required for weapons production. Senator Robert Reynolds of North Carolina stated publicly that the factory floor is no place for the fairer sex. They should maintain the home front, not the production line. Industry executives weren't much better. K.T. Keller, president of Chrysler Corporation, initially told War Production Board Chairman Donald Nelson that women workers would slow production and increase defect rates to unacceptable levels. The numbers proved them catastrophically wrong. By July 1942, the Chrysler tank arsenal employed 680 women out of a total workforce of 6,200. That's 75% female workforce. Production numbers told the story. In January 1942, with a predominantly male workforce, the arsenal produced 187 tanks. In July 1942, with predominantly female workforce, production reached 421 tanks. Same facility, same equipment, more than double the output. The defect rate actually decreased. In January, quality control rejected 2% of completed tanks for welding defects, alignment issues, or component failures. By July, rejection rate dropped to 7%. Women, it turned out, followed instructions more precisely. They asked more questions during training. They double-checked their work more frequently. They reported problems earlier, rather than trying to fix mistakes themselves. Rose Will-Monroe became the face of this transformation, though she never sought it. In May 1943, a Hollywood film crew arrived at the Chrysler tank arsenal. They were shooting a promotional film to encourage war bond purchases. The director, a man named Fred Zinnemann, walked the production floor looking for the right face. He needed someone who looked strong but not masculine, capable but not threatening, relatable, real. He chose Rose. Rose Will-Monroe stood in front of a Sherman tank, pneumatic rivet gun in hand, and spoke directly to the camera. The script was simple. I'm Rose Will-Monroe. I'm a riveter here at the arsenal. I'm doing my part to bring our boys home. Buy war bonds, and you'll be doing yours. The footage aired in theaters across America. The image of Rose, small woman, big tool, bigger tank, became iconic. An artist named J. Howard Miller created a poster based on photographs of female war workers, including Rose. The poster showed a woman in coveralls and red polka dot bandana, flexing her arm. The slogan, "We can do it." Rosie the Riveter was born. But Rose Will-Monroe didn't care about posters. She cared about rivets, she cared about tanks, she cared about John, somewhere in the Pacific, who needed those tanks. The production numbers became staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories produced 88 4-10 tanks. The breakdown, 49 234 Sherman tanks, 17 322 Stuart light tanks, 12 681 tank destroyers, plus thousands of specialized variants. The Chrysler tank arsenal alone produced 25 059 tanks in 4 years, roughly 17 tanks per day, every single day for 48 months. Compare that to the enemy. Germany, with its vaunted industrial capacity and engineering excellence, produced 67 429 tanks total. This includes Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, Panthers, Tigers, everything. Japan, fighting a two-front war across the Pacific and China, produced 600 tanks total. Do the math. America outproduced Germany and Japan combined by a significant margin. And roughly 70% of American war production workers were women. But tanks were only part of the story. American women built 317 aircraft. That's not a typo. 300,000 aircraft in 4 years. B-17 bombers, B-24 Liberators, P-51 Mustangs, C-47 transports. Boeing's Seattle plant employed 38,000 women who assembled B-17s at a rate of 16 per day. North American Aviation in California employed 4,200 women building P-51 Mustangs. Women operated drill presses, installed hydraulic systems, riveted aluminum skin, calibrated instruments, tested engines. Women built 2 710 Liberty ships, the cargo vessels that carried everything from bullets to jeeps across the Atlantic and Pacific. At the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, women welders assembled ship hulls faster than experienced male welders had before the war. Welding crews included former secretaries, former waitresses, former teachers. The record for fastest Liberty ship construction, 4 days, 15 hours. Start to launch. A ship that size would have taken months in peacetime. Women produced 41 billion rounds of ammunition. They filled artillery shells with high explosive. They assembled hand grenades. They packed ammunition belts. They inspected fuses. This work was dangerous. Ammunition plants exploded occasionally. On June 5, 1942, an explosion at the Elwood Ordnance Plant in Illinois killed 15 women. Production resumed the next day. The waiting list of women wanting those jobs didn't shrink. American industrial capacity, powered largely by women, became the decisive strategic advantage of World War II. Germany couldn't match it. Japan couldn't approach it. The Soviet Union contributed enormous manpower, but depended heavily on American production through Lend-Lease. Britain's factories were productive but smaller scale. America buried the Axis powers in tanks, planes, ships, bullets, bombs, and trucks. 6 million American women made this possible. Rose Will Monroe worked at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal until August 1945. She set rivets for 3 years and 4 months, 48 months, 208 weeks, 1,460 days. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days when production quotas increased before major offensives. She made friends on the production floor, women from 38 different states. One of them, a woman named Dorothy Hughes from Nashville, Tennessee, operated the press that formed hull plates. Dorothy was 31 years old, mother of 3, husband serving in the Army Air Corps over Germany. She and Rose ate lunch together most days. They shared a dormitory room at Willow Run. They complained about the food, the noise, the exhaustion, the loneliness. They showed each other letters from their husbands. They cried together when the letters stopped coming for too long. On March 17, 1944, Dorothy received a telegram. Rose was with her when she opened it. The telegram was short. "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your husband, Captain James R. Hughes, has been reported missing in action since 12 March over Germany." Dorothy didn't cry. She folded the telegram carefully. She put it in her pocket. She looked at Rose. "I need to work," Dorothy said. "You should take time." Rose started. "I need to work," Dorothy repeated. "Jimmy would want me to work." Dorothy Hughes worked her full shift that day. She worked every day after that. She never talked about the telegram, but Rose noticed that Dorothy worked faster, harder, with grim determination. As if every hull plate she pressed brought her closer to something. Revenge, resolution, purpose. Dorothy worked until victory in Europe. She worked until Japan surrendered. Then she went home to Nashville. Rose never heard from her again. Stories like Dorothy's were common. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal recorded 127 telegrams delivered to female workers between 1942 and 1945. Missing in action, killed in action, wounded in action. Every time the woman returned to work, sometimes the same day, sometimes the next day, but they returned. The work was too important to stop. The war wouldn't pause for grief. Rose's husband John survived. He served on the destroyer USS O'Bannon in the Pacific. The O'Bannon fought in 13 major engagements. It shot down aircraft, shelled Japanese positions, rescued survivors from sinking ships. John wrote about none of this in his letters. His letters talked about the weather, the food, how much he missed home. He wrote about looking forward to opening a garage after the war. "Monroe's Auto Repair," he wrote. "I'll fix engines. You can handle the books. We'll make it work." John came home in November 1945. Rose met him at Michigan Central Station. He looked thinner, older. He didn't talk much about what he'd seen. She didn't talk much about what she'd built. They took the train back to Kentucky, back to Pulaski County, back to the 4-room house Rose had left 3 years earlier. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal didn't need Rose anymore. Didn't need Dorothy or Mary or Catherine or Helen. The war was over. The men came home. Defense contracts ended. Production halted. Between August and December 1945, the Arsenal laid off 200 workers. Most of them were women. The layoffs followed seniority rules on paper. In practice, women went first. Always. By January 1946, the arsenal employed 800 workers. 43 of them were women, mostly in clerical positions. The production floor returned to its pre-war composition. Male, experienced, traditional. The women who'd built 25 XO-59 tanks dispersed. They went back to Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa. Back to kitchens and counters and classrooms. Back to $0, 35 an hour plus tips. Rose Will Monroe returned to Pulaski County in December 1945. She was 31 years old. She'd spent 3 years and 4 months building tanks. She'd saved $2,847 from her war work. More money than she'd seen in her entire life before Detroit. She'd learned to use tools that most men never touched. She'd proven herself as capable as any worker in American industry. She'd helped defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan through sheer productive power. None of this appeared on her resume when she applied for work at the Greyhound station. The manager, same man who'd employed her before the war, looked at her application. "Says here you worked in Detroit during the war." "Yes, sir. Chrysler Tank Arsenal." "What did you do there?" "I was a riveter, built tanks." The manager nodded slowly. "Well, we don't need riveters here, but we could use another waitress, same pay as before, 35 cents an hour plus tips. Interested?" Rose took the job. She needed the income. John's garage plan required capital they didn't have yet. The $2,847 would help, but they needed steady income first. So Rose returned to carrying coffee pots and pie plates. Her hands, which had operated 32-pound rivet guns for 3 years, held ceramic mugs. Her shoulders, which had braced against pneumatic hammers, balanced trays. The work wasn't difficult, just different, quieter, smaller. She never complained about it. Not once. Not to John. Not to her daughters. Not to her parents. She simply worked. That's what women of her generation did. They worked. When the nation needed tanks, they built tanks. When the nation needed waitresses, they waitressed. The transition was jarring, but Rose adapted. She'd adapted to Detroit. She adapted to Kentucky again. John opened Monroe's Auto Repair in 1948. Small shop on Route 27, 2 bays, 1 hydraulic lift. John fixed cars. Rose handled the books, just like John had written in his letters. The business grew slowly but steadily. They made enough to support their daughters, pay the mortgage, save a little. Middle-class stability, the American dream, small-scale edition. Rose never talked about the war years, not to her daughters, not to neighbors, not to anyone. When people asked what she did during the war, she said, "I worked in a factory for a while." She didn't mention the tanks, didn't mention the rivets, didn't mention Rose the riveter or the poster or the Hollywood film crew. That part of her life existed in a different world, a world of noise and sparks and 12-hour shifts, a world where women built weapons of war and proved themselves equal to any task. That world ended in August 1945. Rose understood this. She didn't resent it. Resentment seemed pointless. She'd done what needed doing. The war was won. Life moved forward. That was enough. Rose Will Monroe died on May 31, 1997 in Clarksville, Indiana. She was 82 years old. Her obituary in the Clarksville News and Tribune mentioned her work at the Greyhound station, her marriage to John, her 2 daughters, her 5 grandchildren. It mentioned Monroe's Auto Repair, which operated until 1987. It did not mention the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, did not mention the 25 XO-59 tanks built there, did not mention Rose's contribution to victory in World War II. The omission wasn't malicious. The obituary writer simply didn't know. Rose never talked about it. Most women of her generation didn't. Their war work existed in a strange liminal space, simultaneously celebrated and forgotten. Celebrated in posters and propaganda during the war. Forgotten when the men returned and reclaimed their jobs, but historians remembered. In 1982, a historian named Schöne Berger Gluck conducted a series of oral history interviews with women who'd worked in war industries. Gluck interviewed former welders, riveters, crane operators, inspectors. She recorded their stories before they died, before the memory faded completely. She published these interviews in a book titled Rosie the Riveter Revisited: Women, the War, and Social Change. The numbers Gluck assembled told the real story. 6 million American women entered the war workforce between 1942 and 1945. Before Pearl Harbor, women comprised 25% of the American workforce. By 1945, women comprised 37% of the workforce. In manufacturing specifically, women went from 20% to 40% of all workers. In aircraft manufacturing, women comprised 65% of the workforce by 1944. In ammunition plants, 70%. In some facilities, 80%. These weren't token positions. Women operated complex machinery, performed precision work, met production quotas, maintained safety standards. Defect rates decreased, production increased, efficiency improved. Every measurable metric demonstrated that women could perform industrial work at levels equal to or exceeding their male predecessors. The immediate post-war period erased much of this progress. Between August 1945 and June 1946, 4.2 million women left the workforce, most involuntarily through layoffs. The percentage of women in manufacturing dropped from 40% to 26% within 12 months. The women who kept factory jobs were mostly relegated to lower-paying, lower-skill positions. The high-paying operator and technical positions returned to male workers. But something fundamental had changed, something that couldn't be completely reversed. Women had proven themselves in the highest-stakes environment imaginable. They'd built the weapons that won the most destructive war in human history. They'd operated machinery declared too complex for female understanding. They'd worked 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions. They'd met every challenge, exceeded every expectation. The experience created a generation of women who knew with absolute certainty that traditional gender limitations were artificial constructs rather than biological reality. This knowledge didn't immediately transform society. The 1950s saw intense cultural pressure for women to return to traditional domestic roles. Television shows, magazines, advertisements all promoted the ideal of the suburban housewife. But underneath that cultural surface, something had shifted. The women who'd built B-17 bombers weren't satisfied just baking cookies. The women who'd welded Liberty ship hulls weren't fulfilled by organizing school bake sales. They wanted more. Their daughters wanted more. Their granddaughters demanded more. The women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 1970s didn't emerge from vacuum. It emerged from the unresolved tension created when 6 million women proved their capability during World War II, then were told to forget that capability and return to domestic subordination. The contradiction was unsustainable. Something had to break. The legacy of Rose Monroe and 6 million women like her isn't just the 88 410 tanks or 300 317 aircraft or 2 710 Liberty ships they built. The legacy is the fundamental destruction of the argument that women couldn't perform industrial, technical, or physically demanding work. That argument died somewhere between 1942 and 1945, killed by overwhelming empirical evidence. What followed? The long struggle for equal pay, equal opportunity, equal respect, was the working out of implications that became undeniable during those 4 years of total war. Today, small museums preserve fragments of this story. The Rosie the Riveter, World War II Homefront National Historical Park in Richmond, California, occupies the site of the Kaiser shipyards, where women built Liberty ships. The museum displays photographs, tools, oral history recordings. It's a small memorial for an enormous achievement. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal no longer exists. The facility was demolished in the 1990s. A shopping mall occupies part of the site. Housing developments cover the rest. Nothing remains of the production floor where Rose Monroe set rivets for 3 years and 4 months. No plaque marks the location. No monument commemorates the 25 Aero 59 tanks built there. The land simply moved forward into a different economic era, as land does. But the numbers remain. Numbers are harder to erase than buildings. 88 410 American tanks versus 67 429 German tanks and 600 Japanese tanks. The arithmetic of victory. American industrial capacity, powered substantially by women who'd never worked in factories before 1942, buried the Axis powers in material they couldn't match. No amount of tactical brilliance or fighting spirit could overcome that disparity. Germany and Japan fought with courage and skill. They lost because America could build tanks faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy them. Rose Monroe set rivets that held together armor that protected soldiers who defeated Nazi Germany. That's the chain of causation. Individual actions multiplied by millions of similar actions, creating a cumulative effect that altered history. Rose never thought about it in those terms. She just set rivets, 2,300 rivets per day, 6 days a week. For 3 years and 4 months. That was enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things during World War II, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story about the real heroes who never sought recognition, never received parades, but whose contribution mattered just as much as any general or admiral. Drop a comment below and tell us, did the women in your family work in war industries during World War II? What did they build? What did they sacrifice? Share your family's story. These memories disappear when we don't preserve them. Thank you for taking the time to remember Rose Monroe and the 6 million American women who proved that courage and capability have no gender. Their legacy lives on every time someone questions arbitrary limitations and demands to be judged by their work rather than their demographic category. That's a lesson worth remembering.